Hello everyone, this is topic 7, linguistic macrofunctions to express communicative intentions. Introduction. Communication has to be understood as a series of communicative acts or speech acts which are used systematically to accomplish particular purposes. By linguistic function, we understand the predominant purpose in a given communicative act. Research suggests that the learning of vocabulary, grammar, discourse rules, etc. is completely useless if the learner cannot use it for the functional purpose of expressing and understanding meanings. In this sense, notional, functional and communicative syllabi deserve special attention. Language functions. Broadly speaking, communicative functions are the uses to which we put the language, having to do with the speaker's intention, also referred to as illocutionary forms. L2 learners need to understand the purpose of communication by developing an awareness of what the purpose of communicative act is. However, the presentation of functions is non-language specific. They involve a description of what the learners should be able to do and the functions they will be able to handle at one particular level. Therefore, students should also learn how to achieve that purpose. In reality, there's a whole list of language functions given by many authors, but here we're going to focus on the one which was given by Jacobson in the 60s. He included cognitive function, referential function, phatic function, emotive function, poetic function, and metalinguistic function. There are many other authors who did different taxonomies on the functions, but to put it more simply, we can broadly distinguish between transactional, that is practical and factual, and interactional, that is personal, emotional and social, use of language. Most of the functions can be included within one group or another. A brief note on systemic functional grammar. Once the functions have been considered, let's now move on to the functional and semantic orientation of systemic functional grammar, which accounts for how language is structured for use. This grammar is systemic because the notion of system is of paramount importance. Language is defined as a semantic system with other systems through which those meanings are encoded, that is, a system network. The organizing concept of these systems is the notion of choice. This grammar is functional because it holds that the overriding property of language is its functional nature. This way, whereas formalist grammars would ask, what do these forms mean? That is, they would focus on the forms. Functional grammar opts for how is language structured for use? That is, they focus on the meaning. Halliday divided meanings into three broad areas called metafunctions, which are these three. Ideational is where language is used to organize, understand and express our perceptions. Interpersonal is where language is used to enable us to participate in communicative acts with other people, and textual is where language is used to relate what is said or written to the rest of the text and the other linguistic events. In almost any instance of language use, all three metafunctions operate simultaneously. Therefore, every sentence in a text is multifunctional. This functional orientation is clearly concerned with language in use, which sharply contrasts with Chomsky's mentalistic grammar, which describes language by using introspection rather than real examples of language in use. Meaning and context, factors influencing the choice of a linguistic exponent. So as Halliday rightly pointed out, the choices we make in the system of a language are assumed to be meaningful and reflect the speaker's or writer's intentions to the concrete forms of a language. This way, the same propositional message can be realized by different linguistic choices with an impact on the meaning, and here is an example. The most crucial factors introducing our choice of linguistic exponents are to be found in the context of the situation, the register. Halliday outlined three variables within the situational context which have linguistic consequences. So the field is what language is being used to talk about. The tenor is concerned with the choices we make in terms of formality, and the mode is the role language is playing in interaction, distinguishing between the oral and the written medium. Another important issue to take into account are presuppositions. An intrinsic feature of communication is that the encoder assumes that some information is already known by the addressee. This fact affects the degree of explicitness of our message, as well as the ordering of information. All these issues can be summarized in the concept of appropriateness, which requires an understanding of the topic, the situation, the participants, the style, and the purpose of communication. In every single communicative act, we should look for that which is appropriate. Speech act theory. The speech act theory holds that all utterances perform specific actions through having specific forces. Austin distinguished between three types of speech acts, although they are usually performed simultaneously. So the first one is locutionary act, the act of saying something. Then there's the illocutionary act, the act in saying something, which is closely related to the communicative intention of the speaker, and perlocutionary act, the act as a result of saying something. It refers to the effects upon the feelings, thoughts, or actions of the audience. Out of all these three dimensions, the most widely discussed is the illocutionary act or force. As a matter of fact, the whole theory has come to refer exclusively to that type of act, to such an extent that speech act and illocutionary force are used as synonyms. Austin also allocated speech acts to 5 distinct categories according to their illocutionary force, and here are the categories. Please pause here the video if you want to take notes. Indirect speech acts. Although the correspondence between clause types and the speech acts they can perform is not one-to-one, speech acts or discourse functions do have characteristic correlation with clause types. Though in most instances of language, what the speaker says and means is the same, but such is not always the case. On certain occasions, the speaker or writer makes use of a syntactic type of sentence whose meaning is different from the illocutionary force conveyed by the uttering of the sentence. So for example, if someone says, "Can you please close the window?" That's an interrogative sentence, but its illocutionary force is a request. When the typical correspondence between clause type and speech does not hold, as in the previous example, we speak of indirect speech acts, which are defined by Searle as sentences that contain the illocutionary force indicators for one kind of speech act, but which can be uttered to perform in addition another type of illocutionary act. This way, in indirect speech acts, the speaker communicates more than they actually say, by way of relying on mutually shared background information. Indirect speech acts are problematic for linguists, since one questions how it is possible for a speaker to say one thing and mean that, but also to mean something else, and what's more, for the hearer to understand both meanings. Searle suggests that we're able to derive meaning out of indirect speech acts by means of a cooperative process, out of which we're able to derive multiple illocutions. This takes us to the cooperative principle. This principle forces speakers to express themselves in such a way as to not impede communication, and hearers to assume that whatever is addressed to them is designed to make sense. This principle is elaborated in 4 sub-principles or maxims, and here they are. By all means, crisis point is not that we always adhere to these maxims on a superficial level. No one actually speaks like that the whole time, but rather that, wherever possible, people will interpret what we say as conforming to the maxims on at least some level. A speaker might breach a maxim, but still communication would be successful. In this sense, conversational implicatures arise where the speaker deliberately flouts the maxims. When hearers notice these infringements, they continue to assume that the speaker is making them for a good reason. Despite the apparent failure, we try to interpret the utterance as cooperative as possible at some deeper level. This way we can see that conversations are, at least to some degree, cooperative efforts. Inferences arise to preserve the assumption of cooperation. Implications for the language classroom, micro and macro functions. Following the common European framework, functions may be divided into micro and macro functions. The former make reference to the knowledge of which particular functions are expressed by which language forms. These macrofunctions are categorized into imparting and seeking factual information, expressing and finding out attitudes, suasion, socializing, structuring discourse, and communication repair. However, for communication to be effective, we need something more, for example, interaction. In this sense, it is common for microfunctions to form pairs such as question-answer, agreement, disagreement, etc. It is also common for them to appear in triplets, with the speaker responding to the listener's reply. Within macrofunctions, microfunctions are combined into larger and more extended units. Macrofunctions include this. So as we can see, macrofunctions include different types of text. Students need to be able to tell them apart, recognizing their purpose. Similarly, they should be acquainted with the different genres, which will allow them to have some knowledge of what to expect when they read or listen, or what they should be aiming at when they speak or write. In more complex goal-oriented cooperative transactions, language is used as necessary to establish common agreement on goals and on the action, agree roles in carrying out the action, identify and dealing with problems which may arise, coordinate and sequencing contributions, and recognize the final achievement of the task. In conclusion, as teachers, we need to decide what importance will be given to the system of a language, that is, the form, as compared to a functional communicative approach based on real language use. Obviously enough, students need to master both the functions and the linguistic choices embodying them, that is, they need to master the meaning and the form. However, what remains clear is that language is primarily functional and instrumental and should be taught accordingly. Speech act analysis has provided researchers with valuable insights into language functions and the connection between function and grammatical form. Sociolinguistic and contrastive analysis have also played their part by analysing how particular speech acts might change according to the gender, age, or role of interactants, as well as delineating cross-cultural similarities and differences. In this sense, structural approaches become insufficient, while notional, functional and communicative approaches will yield for greater success. However, it is also worth noting that communicative syllabi have been seriously criticized in terms of grading. Contrary to grammatical items, communicative functions do not allow for an easy ordering. This is so because the same function can have different language exponents with varying degrees of difficulty. To solve this problem, a twofold solution has been suggested. On the one hand, functions should be presented according to the student's communicative needs and interests, and from more simple to more complex. On the other hand, the teaching of functions is seen as a cyclical process, the same function recurring with different degrees of structural complexity each time. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out the other topics, like, comment, subscribe, whatever, and I'll see you in the next one.